I believed that loving harder would fix everything. I was wrong. I'm 61 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being a good mother meant never saying no. It meant being available before being asked. It meant paying attention to other people's needs before I even checked my own. Somewhere along the way, I learned that love was proven through sacrifice, quiet sacrifice, invisible sacrifice, the kind no one applauds because it's simply expected. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin this story, a story of betrayal and the moment I finally chose myself, I kindly ask for your support. Please subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts that need them most. I'd also love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which city or country you're listening from. Seeing how far these stories travel truly warms my spirit. And now, settle in and enjoy the story. By the end of that week, I would cut off my own son, completely. Not in anger, not as a threat, not temporarily, but in a way that could never be undone. At the time, I didn't know that yet. None of us ever do when things begin to unravel. It all started quietly. Most disasters do. My son David called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I was standing in my kitchen rinsing a coffee cup, thinking about nothing in particular. The phone rang, and his name lit up the screen. I felt that familiar flicker of relief, the one that comes from being needed. "Mom," he said, his voice warm and casual, the same voice that once asked for help with spelling homework, then college applications, then rent. "We have news." I smiled before he even finished speaking. I always smiled first. "What kind of news?" I asked. "We're getting married." For a moment, I didn't respond. I lowered myself into the kitchen chair, the legs scraping softly against the tile. Married. He hadn't mentioned an engagement ring, or a proposal, or even a discussion about timing. Just a decision already made, already moving forward without me. "That's wonderful," I said. Because that's what a good mother says, because I'd spent decades learning which feelings were appropriate to show and which ones needed to stay quiet. Amanda took the phone next. Her voice was light, cheerful. She laughed easily as if this were all very natural, very happy. She thanked me for everything I'd done for them, for the support, for being understanding, for always being there. Her tone was polite, almost warm. The kind of warmth that feels practiced, like something she'd learned how to perform. I wanted to believe it. "You've always been so generous," she said. "We're really lucky to have you." Lucky. That word stayed with me long after the call ended. I stood alone in my kitchen afterward, the house unusually quiet. I should have felt excited, proud. Instead, I felt disoriented, like I'd stepped into a conversation that had already been going on without me. Over the next few days, the details began to arrive, not all at once, slowly, carefully. The wedding was soon, much sooner than I expected. The venue was already booked, the guest list finalized, the plans set, and the bills were flexible. At first, the request sounded reasonable. "Mom, could you help with the deposit? We'll pay you back." Then they grew. "The furniture won't arrive in time unless we upgrade the deligally." Then they became constant. Rent, appliances, groceries, clothes. Little things that added up, bills I didn't remember agreeing to, expenses I wasn't consulted about, but paid anyway. Each time I hesitated just long enough to feel the guilt settle in. Then I transferred the money. I told myself this was temporary, that once they were settled, once the wedding was over, things would change. I told myself this was what support looked like. I didn't notice how much of myself I was erasing in the process. One afternoon, sitting at the same kitchen table, I opened my banking app and felt something tighten in my chest. The numbers didn't look right. They looked thin, fragile. Carefully, gently, I asked if they had set a budget. That's when Amanda's tone changed. "Well," she said casually, almost dismissively, "we thought you'd want to help. You always have." There was no gratitude this time, no hesitation, just expectation. By the end of that month, I had paid $33,000, not from extra savings, not from money I wouldn't miss, from the account I'd built slowly, carefully, the one meant for emergencies, for medical care, for the years when my body might need help my children wouldn't be able to give. The money I told myself was security. I had spent my future trying to secure theirs. The moment everything finally shattered came during a phone call. My hands were shaking when I dialed. I told David I needed to slow down, that I couldn't keep paying for everything, that I was starting to feel afraid. There was silence on the line. Then Amanda's voice cut in, sharp, confident, indisputably certain. "Didn't I tell you? I only help special people." The words hit me because they weren't new. That was a phrase I used to say back when I believed love meant sacrifice without limits. Hearing it thrown back at me felt like watching my own mistake come alive, like realizing I'd taught someone exactly how to hurt me. That night I didn't sleep. The next morning I made a decision that terrified me. I transferred nothing. No rent, no groceries, no apology. When I got home later that day, there were cars in my driveway. They were inside my house, waiting. For a moment, I sat in my car and didn't move. The engine was still running. The radio murmured softly, some cheerful song that felt wildly inappropriate. I stared at the front of my house, and tried to understand why it suddenly felt like unfamiliar territory. There were 3 cars in the driveway. One was David's, one I didn't recognize. The third belonged to someone I absolutely had not invited. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I considered driving away, just for a few minutes, just to breathe, but the thought of leaving my own home because I felt afraid made something harden inside me. So I turned off the engine and stepped out. The front door was unlocked. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Inside, voices carried from the living room, laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. Someone had made themselves comfortable. David looked up first when I entered. His smile appeared automatically, then faltered when he saw my face. "Mom," he said, standing quickly, "we were just—" Amanda didn't get up. She was seated on my couch like she belonged there, legs crossed, phone resting casually in her hand. Next to her sat a woman I recognized vaguely, Carla, one of her friends, someone I'd met once at a dinner and never expected to see again. "We let ourselves in," Amanda said lightly. "Hope that's okay." It wasn't, but I didn't say that yet. "I need everyone who doesn't live here to leave," I said. The room went quiet. Carla looked between us, uncomfortable. David opened his mouth, then closed it again. Amanda smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with the confidence of someone who believed she still had control. "We're family," she said. "There's no need to make this dramatic." I set my purse down slowly. "This is my home," I replied, "and I asked you to leave." David finally spoke. "Mom, you're overreacting. We just wanted to talk." "Then you should have asked," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. Amanda sighed and stood, smoothing her clothes. "Fine, we'll go, but this conversation isn't over." She was right. It wasn't. They left, but the silence they left behind felt heavier than their presence. That night, David called. He sounded tired, defensive, hurt. "Amanda feels like you embarrassed her," he said. I closed my eyes. "David, she entered my home without permission. She didn't mean anything by it." "She never does," I said quietly. There was a pause. "You didn't send the money," he said. "No." "We had bills, Mom." "I know. So why—" Because I can't anymore. He exhaled sharply. You always say that and then you help anyway. That was the moment I realized how deep this went. I won't this time, I said. The call ended shortly after. The next few days were relentless. Texts, calls, messages that alternated between guilt and anger. You're punishing us. This is emotional abuse. After everything we've been through. Amanda sent longer messages than David did, carefully worded ones, ones that made me question myself. Do you know how this looks? People are starting to notice. You don't want to be seen as unstable. That word, unstable, lodged itself somewhere deep. One afternoon, there was a knock at my door. 2 people stood there, a man in a blazer and a woman holding a clipboard. We're here to check on your well-being, the woman said gently. We received a concern. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Inside, they asked questions about my finances, my memory, whether I felt confused lately, whether I was capable of managing my own affairs. I answered calmly, but my heart pounded. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. They were shaking. That was when it hit me. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control. That night, I called Joyce. They're trying to make me look incapable, I said. Joyce didn't hesitate. Then you need help, the right kind. The next morning, I called Carla, not Amanda's friend, but my attorney, a woman I'd known years ago but never thought I'd need. She listened, asked questions, took notes. Then she said something that changed everything. You've done nothing wrong, but you need to stop engaging directly immediately. I followed her advice. No more explanations, no more defending myself, no more apologies. When David called again, I didn't pick up. Instead, I sent one message. I'm taking legal advice. Please contact my attorney. The response was instant. Amanda called over and over. I let it ring. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix the discomfort. I sat with it. It was awful, and it was necessary. That night, I locked every door in my house, not because I felt weak, but because I was finally protecting something that belonged to me. The silence that followed my message was worse than the calls. No ringing phone, no vibrating screen, no accusations I could brace myself against. Just quiet. For 2 full days, I didn't hear from David or Amanda. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it made my chest ache with anticipation, like waiting for a storm you know is coming but can't see yet. On the 3rd morning, a letter arrived. Not handwritten, not friendly, official. My name typed neatly across the envelope. Inside were words I had to read twice to understand. Concern, assessment, capacity. The letter explained, politely, professionally, that a request had been made to evaluate my cognitive fitness, that there were questions about my recent behavior, that cooperation would help clarify misunderstandings. My hands began to tremble. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I had balanced checkbooks and birthday cards and grocery lists for decades. This table had seen my entire adult life, and now, sitting there, I felt like a stranger in it. I reread the letter slowly. It never said David, it never said Amanda, but I knew. That night, David called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to hear his voice, needed to know whether this was really happening or if I had misunderstood everything. "Hi, Mom," he said gently. That gentleness scared me more than anger ever had. "Why is there a letter questioning my mental capacity?" I asked. A pause, just long enough. "We're worried about you," he said carefully. "We?" I repeated. "Amanda and I," he replied. Some of the things you said lately, they don't sound like you. I laughed, a short, brittle sound. They don't sound like the version of me you're used to. Mom, he said, lowering his voice, are you sure you remember everything clearly? That question landed like a blow. Yes, I said. I remember paying your rent every month. I remember helping with your bills. I remember not being invited to your wedding. That's not how Amanda remembers it, he said quickly. Of course it wasn't. She says you knew. She says you said you didn't want to come. My throat tightened. That's a lie. She wouldn't lie about something like that, he said. I closed my eyes. I'm your mother, I said. Have I ever lied to you about something like that? Silence. I just think memories can change, he said finally, especially as people get older. There it was. Age weaponized. I'm 61, I said evenly, not confused, not fragile, just no longer useful to you in the same way. That's not fair, he replied. No, I said, it's accurate. The call ended shortly after. I sat in the dark long after, replaying every conversation from the past year. Had I said something wrong? Had I forgotten something important? Had I misunderstood? That's how gaslighting works. It doesn't erase your memory. It makes you distrust it. The next day, Carla called. They're attempting to establish a narrative, she said, that you're unstable, that your decisions aren't reliable. My chest tightened. Can they do that? They can try, she replied, but trying doesn't mean succeeding. She explained everything carefully, my rights, the process, the protections. You are not required to give them access to your medical records, she said firmly, and you will not attend any evaluation they arrange. I felt tears spill over. I've never been so afraid. I know, she said gently, because this kind of threat isn't loud, it's quiet, and it attacks who you are. After we hung up, I walked through my house slowly. I touched the bookshelf, the framed photos, the calendar on the wall. These things were real. I was real. That evening, Amanda called. I answered. I don't understand why you're being like this, she said, her voice cool. We're trying to help you. By questioning my sanity? I asked. By protecting David, she replied. He's under a lot of stress. So am I replied. This wouldn't be happening if you just cooperate, she said. Love doesn't come with paperwork, I replied. She scoffed. You always make yourself the victim. No, I said, I'm making myself the authority. She hung up. That night I slept poorly. Dreams of being lost, of calling for help and being told I was mistaken. I woke before dawn, heart racing, and sat on the edge of the bed. That was when I understood something essential. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about marriage. It was about erasing me, slowly, politely, legally. And once I saw that clearly, I knew something else too. I wasn't fighting to be loved anymore. I was fighting to exist. The letter stayed on my kitchen table for 2 full days. I didn't move it, didn't hide it, didn't throw it away. I needed to look at it until it lost its power. Every time I passed the table, my eyes were pulled back to those words: evaluation, capacity, recommendation. They sat there like a quiet accusation, pretending to be neutral while threatening everything I had built. On the second night, I dreamed my house no longer belonged to me. People walked in and out freely. They rearranged furniture, opened drawers, spoke over me as if I weren't there. When I tried to tell them they were wrong, they smiled kindly and said, "It's okay, Mabel, you're confused." I woke up gasping for air. That morning, I called Carla before I could talk myself out of it.
I don't want to do this, I said, my voice shaking. I don't want to sit in a room and prove I'm still myself. I know, she replied, but this isn't about proving anything to them. It's about protecting you. She explained the plan slowly, carefully, like she knew every word mattered. You'll see a doctor of our choosing, she said. Someone independent, someone ethical. No ambush, no surprises. What if I fail? I whispered. There was a pause. Mabel, she said firmly, you are not failing because someone doesn't like your boundaries. The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the days leading up to it, I noticed how fragile confidence can feel when it's been questioned. I double-checked everything, the stove knobs, the door locks, my calendar. I caught myself rehearsing answers to questions no one had asked yet. What day is it? Who is the president? Do you manage your finances? I hated that I felt the need to prepare. On Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to anchor myself. Soft blouse, comfortable shoes, a necklace my husband had given me years ago, the kind you wear when you need to remember who you were before everything got complicated. The waiting room was quiet, too quiet. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching the second hand on the clock move forward, each tick louder than the last. I wondered how many people before me had sat in that same chair, afraid that their entire identity was about to be reduced to a checklist. When the nurse called my name, I stood slowly, deliberately. The doctor's office was warm. Bookshelves, framed certificates, a window that let in actual sunlight. He stood when I entered. Mrs. Harris, he said, kindly, offering his hand. I'm Dr. Levin. His voice wasn't rushed. That mattered more than I expected. I want to be clear, he said as we sat down. This isn't an interrogation. There are no right or wrong answers here. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. We talked for nearly an hour. Not in bullet points, not in tricks. He asked about my daily routine, what time I woke up, what I liked to cook, how I paid my bills. He asked about my late husband. What was he like? He asked. I smiled softly. Stubborn, loyal. He always believed problems could be fixed if you stayed long enough. Dr. Levin nodded. And do you believe that? I asked. I hesitated. I used to. He didn't interrupt. He asked about David, about the wedding, about the money, about the phone call. When I reached the part about special people, my voice cracked. I used to say that, I admitted quietly, that I only helped special people. I said it jokingly, as a way to feel included, and then she used it against me. Dr. Levin leaned back slightly, studying me, not skeptically, but thoughtfully. Mrs. Harris, he asked, can you tell me why you stopped supporting your son financially? I didn't hesitate, because helping them was destroying me, and I finally noticed. He smiled just a little. That's a very clear reason, he said. At the end of the session, he stood and walked me to the door. You understand your life, he said plainly, and you understand your choices. That's all this evaluation is meant to assess. I walked out feeling lighter, but still afraid. 2 days later, Carla called. You're cleared, she said, completely. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my body finally released something it had been holding for weeks. They have no medical leverage, she added, none. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to safety. That feeling lasted exactly 4 days. On Saturday afternoon, David showed up alone. No Amanda, no lawyer, just my son standing on my porch like he wasn't sure whether he belonged there anymore. I opened the door before he could knock. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Hi, I replied. He stepped inside, looking around like the house felt different now. I didn't know about the evaluation until after it was requested, he quickly said. I swear. I studied his face, searching for something solid. Why didn't you stop it? I asked. He looked down. Because part of me wondered if they were right. That honesty hurt more than any lie. I didn't think you were incapable, he continued. I just thought maybe you were acting out of hurt. I was, I said calmly. That doesn't make me confused. He nodded slowly. Then he said it. Amanda's pregnant. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I already heard, I replied. She's scared, he said. We both are. I met his eyes. Fear doesn't excuse cruelty. He swallowed hard. She believed you'd always be there, he said, that you'd never stop helping. I was there, I said softly, until I wasn't allowed to exist outside of what I provided. He sat back, stunned. I'm asking you, he said finally, to reconsider, just for a little while. The old version of me stirred, the version that reached for her wallet to avoid silence. I folded my hands in my lap. No, I said. His head snapped up. Mom? No, I repeated. I will not buy my way back into your life. He stood abruptly, anger and fear battling in his face. So that's it? He asked. You're choosing this over family? I stood too. I'm choosing myself for the first time. He left without another word. That night, Amanda sent a message. You've destroyed our future. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it, and something inside me, something old and tired, finally loosened its grip.
After David left, the house felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just altered. The same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet ticking of the clock in the hallway. But something essential had shifted, like a piece of furniture moved in the dark. I kept expecting the old tension to rush back in, to fill the space the way it always had. It didn't. That absence was unsettling. For years, anxiety had been my companion. It lived in small habits, checking my phone too often, keeping mental lists of what I still owed, measuring my days by other people's needs. Without it, time felt oddly unstructured. The first night, I slept poorly, not because of fear, but because my mind kept reaching for problems that weren't there anymore. I woke up before dawn and lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. I wondered how long I'd mistaken obligation for purpose. In the morning, I made breakfast for myself, not toast eaten standing at the counter, not coffee gulped while checking my phone. I sat down. Eggs, slightly overcooked, toast with butter melting into the corners, coffee, still too hot to drink. I noticed everything, the clink of the fork against the plate, the light coming through the window, the absence of urgency. I realized how long it had been since I'd eaten without guilt. Later that morning, Carla called. "They've withdrawn the request," she said. "Which request?" I asked, my heart still quick to brace. "The evaluation," she replied. "Their attorney contacted me this morning. They're stepping back." I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Why?" I asked. Carla paused. "Because continuing would expose their motivations, and they don't want that examined." I understood immediately. This was never about concern. It was about control. 2 days later, Joyce invited me to lunch, a small diner we used to visit years ago, back when life felt simpler, or at least more honest. She studied me across the table. "You look different." "I feel different," I said. "Not happier," she clarified, "just steadier." I nodded. I think I finally stopped arguing with reality. She hesitated, then said, "Have you heard anything more about the pregnancy?" "No," I replied. "Why?" She stirred her coffee slowly. "I ran into Amanda's cousin last weekend, completely by accident." My chest tightened. And she didn't know Amanda was pregnant. I sat back. That doesn't mean anything. Joyce nodded. True, but she did say something else. I waited. She said Amanda has told that story before. The words were quiet, almost casual, but they echoed. Before? I asked. Yes, Joyce said, with a previous boyfriend. Same urgency, same timing, same pressure. I felt anger rise, but beneath it was something else. Relief. Relief that my instincts hadn't failed me. Relief that the unease I'd felt for years had a name. That evening, David called. His voice sounded strained, like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "Mom," he said, "did you talk to Joyce?" "Yes," I replied honestly. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. "Amanda thinks she's spreading rumors." "I think she's telling the truth," I said gently. Silence. "The appointment was canceled," he said finally. "Which appointment?" I asked. "The obstetrician," he replied. "Amanda said she wasn't feeling well." I didn't respond. He continued, "I asked to reschedule. She got angry, said I didn't trust her." I closed my eyes. "David," I said softly, "has she shown you any paperwork, any test results?" "No," he admitted. "And when did she tell you she was pregnant?" I asked. Another pause. "Right after you cut us off," he said quietly. There it was. The truth didn't shout. It waited. "I don't know what to think anymore," he said. I felt something shift inside me, not satisfaction, not triumph, just sadness. "That confusion," I said, "is what happens when someone controls the story long enough." He didn't argue. "I'm scared," he whispered. "For the first time," I said gently, "that fear belongs to you, not me." We ended the call without resolution, and for the first time, that didn't feel like failure. 2 days later, a letter arrived, handwritten, from Amanda. She wrote about stress, about pressure, about feeling misunderstood. She didn't mention a baby, not once. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to keep it, to take away its power. That Friday, I booked a trip. Nothing dramatic, a short train ride to the coast, a small hotel near the water. When I told Joyce, she smiled. About time. On the train, watching the scenery blur past, I realized something important. I had spent years believing love meant endurance, that if I stayed long enough, gave enough, hurt quietly enough, things would eventually get better. But love that requires self-erasure isn't love, it's survival. And I was done surviving. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting, not for apologies, not for permission, not for someone else to change. I was moving forward, not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. And that was enough. The coast was quieter than I expected. Not the kind of quiet that feels lonely, the kind that feels deliberate, like the world had decided to lower its voice so you could finally hear yourself think. I arrived just before sunset. The hotel was small, modest, nothing fancy. My room smelled faintly of salt and clean linen. I set my bag down and stood at the window for a long time, watching the water stretch endlessly toward the horizon. No one needed anything from me. That thought felt unfamiliar enough to make my chest tighten. That night I slept deeply. No dreams, no sudden jolts awake, just rest. When I woke in the morning, sunlight filled the room, and for a moment I forgot everything: the wedding, the money, the letters, the fear. Then my phone rang. David. I stared at his name for a long time before answering. "Mom," he said, his voice low and unsteady, "are you alone?" "Yes," I replied. "What's wrong?" "She lied," he said. I didn't ask who. "The doctor confirmed it," he continued.
There was never a pregnancy. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. Not relief, not victory, just release, like something heavy had finally been set down. "When did you find out?" I asked. "This morning," he said. "I went without telling her. I needed to know." "And?" I asked gently. "She admitted it," he replied. "Said she felt desperate, said she was afraid I'd leave if she didn't give me a reason to stay." I pictured Amanda in my mind, not as a villain, not as a monster, but as someone willing to lie rather than face uncertainty. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. "I don't know who she is anymore," David whispered. "That's what truth does," I said quietly. "It doesn't change people, it reveals them." There was a pause. "She blamed you," he added. I almost smiled. Almost. "I'm sure she did," I replied. He exhaled shakily. "I don't know how I let it get this bad." "Because it was easier than questioning the story you wanted to believe," I said honestly. He didn't argue. "She says you turned me against her, that you poisoned me." "I didn't turn you," I said. "I stopped protecting the lie." The line went quiet. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally. The old me would have rushed to reassure him, would have promised everything would be okay, would have softened the truth to spare his feelings. Instead, I said, "Then don't try to own me." When we hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something close to grief. Grief for the years I had spent believing that love required silence. Later that afternoon, Joyce texted, "Proud of you." I smiled and slipped the phone into my pocket. 2 days later, I returned home. The house looked the same, but it felt warmer, like it recognized me again. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, placing each item where it belonged. That act alone felt grounding. That evening, a car pulled into my driveway. Amanda. She stood on the porch, arms folded tightly, eyes red but sharp. I watched her through the window for a moment before opening the door. I didn't invite her in. "You ruined my marriage," she said flatly. I studied her face, the anger, the fear, the loss of control. "No," I replied, "you ruined your lie." She laughed bitterly. "He chose you." "He chose the truth," I corrected. "There's a difference." "You think you've won," she snapped. I shook my head. This was never a game. Her voice rose. "You made him doubt me. You made him question everything." "I made him question nothing," I said calmly. "You did." She stared at me like she wanted to scream, then suddenly deflated. "I was scared. I thought if I lost your money, I'd lose him." I met her eyes. Love that depends on money isn't love. It's rent. That did it. Her face hardened. "You think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I think I'm done." She left without another word. That night, David texted me. "I'm staying at a friend's place." I replied once, "Take care of yourself," and I meant it. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing what he broke. I went to bed early and slept deeply. No guilt, no fear, just quiet. And in that quiet, something inside me finally healed. The days after Amanda left felt strangely hollow. Not empty, just unoccupied. I woke without urgency. No messages asking for money, no emergencies manufactured from thin air, no emotional fires waiting for me to put them out before breakfast. I drank my coffee at the kitchen table and realized I had nowhere I needed to be. That realization unsettled me more than the chaos ever had. For decades, my value had been measured in usefulness, in sacrifice, in how quickly I responded when someone needed something, especially David. Now, without those demands, I felt untethered, like a woman stepping out of a role she had played so long she forgot it was optional. Joyce noticed it immediately. "You don't look relieved," she said one afternoon when she came by with soup. "You look suspended." "That's exactly how it feels," I admitted, "like I stepped off a moving train and my body still thinks it's speeding." She nodded. "That's withdrawal." "From what?" "From being needed." The words landed harder than I expected. I had always told myself I was helping, that I was supporting, that I was loving, but love doesn't hollow you out. Over the next week, small truths surfaced. I realized how often I checked my phone without thinking, waiting for a crisis that never came. How quiet my house really was. How loud my thoughts could be when no one interrupted them. One morning, I opened my banking app, something I had avoided for months. The numbers stared back at me, unchanged, still damaged, still smaller than they should have been at 61. I calculated it slowly, carefully. The $33,000 I had given wasn't just money. It was 2 years of retirement contributions, a safety net for medical emergencies, the freedom to retire on my own terms. I had traded my future for the illusion of harmony. That truth hurt more than any argument ever had. Later that afternoon, David called. I let it ring twice before answering. "I'm not calling for money," he said quickly. "I just wanted to check in." "I'm listening," I replied. He sounded tired, not defeated, just unprotected. "I didn't realize how much you covered for us," he admitted. "I thought things just worked out." "That's because someone was paying for the gaps," I said gently. Silence. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered. "You don't fix it by leaning on me. You fix it by standing." There was no argument this time, no defensiveness. "I'm trying. It's harder than I thought." "Yes," I replied, "it is." When we hung up, I didn't feel drained. I felt appropriately tired. That difference mattered. A week later, I met Carla again. She slid a folder across the table. "Everything is finalized. Accounts secured. No shared access. You're legally protected." I exhaled slowly. "For the first time," I told her, "I feel like my life is actually mine." She smiled. "That's usually what happens when women stop apologizing for existing." That night, I stood in my bedroom and looked at the clothes hanging in my closet. Most of them were old, practical, bought for function, not joy. I donated half of them the next day, not because I wanted something new, but because I wanted something chosen. I began taking long walks in the mornings, no destination, just movement. I noticed details I had ignored for years, the sound of leaves, the way sunlight shifted across the sidewalk, how my breathing slowed when I wasn't rushing. One evening, Joyce asked, "Do you miss him?" I didn't answer right away. "I miss the idea of who I thought he was, but not who he became when I stopped paying." She reached for my hand. "That's honest." Later that night, alone in bed, I admitted something I had never said out loud. I had raised my son to believe that love was limitless, but I had never taught him that it was not automatic. Boundaries weren't punishments. They were invitations to grow, to choose, to take responsibility. The quiet that once scared me now felt earned. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I was waiting for myself. There is a strange grief that comes with freedom. No one warns you about it. People talk about relief, empowerment, strength, but they don't talk about the quiet mourning that follows when a role you've lived inside for decades finally dissolves. I felt it most in the mornings. For years, my first thought upon waking had been David.
whether he needed something, whether I had missed a message, whether today would bring another emergency disguised of urgency. Now my mornings were blank. At first, I tried to fill them. I reorganized drawers that didn't need organizing, cleaned surfaces that were already clean, watched the news longer than necessary just to hear another human voice. But avoidance has a sound, and eventually, silence catches up to you. One morning, while folding laundry, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Not in a bad way, just unfiltered. No performance, no readiness, no alertness sharpened by responsibility. Just me. I sat on the edge of the bed and asked myself a question I had never allowed before. Who am I when I'm not needed? The answer didn't come right away, so I started small. I signed up for a local community art class, something I had loved in my 30s, but abandoned when life got busy. The room smelled like paint and dust, and I felt awkward holding a brush again, like my hands had forgotten joy. The instructor smiled at me. "You don't have to be good," she said. "You just have to show up." That felt like permission. The first painting was terrible. I kept it anyway. Each week, something loosened inside me, not dramatically, just quietly. I began to remember parts of myself that had nothing to do with being a mother, a provider, a fixer. One afternoon after class, I sat in my car longer than usual, not ready to go home. Home used to feel like duty. Now it felt like space. David texted that evening. "I started therapy." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I doubted him, but because I was learning not to react immediately. After a few minutes, I replied, "That's a good step." Nothing more. No praise, no rescue, no emotional overextension. I noticed my hands weren't shaking when I sent it. That was new. A few days later, I received a call from my sister, someone I had drifted from over the years, largely because my emotional energy had been elsewhere. "I heard things were rough," she said gently. "They were," I replied. "They're quieter now." She laughed softly. "Quiet can be good." We talked for over an hour about nothing urgent, nothing heavy, just memories, aging parents, small annoyances. When we hung up, I felt connected in a way I hadn't in years. Not through sacrifice, through presence. That night, I realized something important. I had confused loyalty with self-erasure. I had believed that being a good mother meant never saying no, never stepping back, never allowing my child to feel discomfort. But discomfort is where growth happens. Love that protects too much becomes a cage. One evening, Joyce and I sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange. "You're different," she said, "quieter but steadier." I feel like I'm finally standing on my own feet, even if they're a little shaky. She smiled. That's how real strength starts. As weeks passed, I noticed how my body responded to this new life. My shoulders sat lower, my sleep deepened, my thoughts slowed. I wasn't constantly bracing for impact. And in that steadiness, I made a promise to myself. I would never again confuse love with depletion. I could still be a mother, just not a martyr. And for the first time, that distinction felt like freedom. 3 months passed, not in dramatic leaps, just in ordinary days stacked quietly on top of one another. I learned the rhythm of my new life. Morning walks, art class on Thursdays, grocery shopping without calculating what I could afford to give away later. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. David and I spoke occasionally, short, careful conversations that didn't spill over into old habits. Then one afternoon he asked to meet. "I want to talk," he said, "not argue." We chose a cafe halfway between our houses. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Not physically, emotionally. He looked tired in a different way, less frantic, less entitled, more present. We ordered coffee and sat across from each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." I stayed silent. "I thought love meant you'd always catch me," he continued. "I never considered what it cost you." I watched his hands, steady, open, no defensiveness. "I didn't just take money," he said. "I took your peace." Something loosened in my chest. "I thought you were choosing Amanda over me," he admitted. "I didn't realize you were choosing yourself." "I needed to," I replied, "or I would have disappeared." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." He told me about therapy, about learning the difference between support and dependence, between partnership and control. He didn't blame Amanda. He didn't excuse himself. That mattered. "I'm not asking for things to go back," he said. "I know they can't." "What are you asking for?" I asked. "A chance to rebuild," he said, slowly, honestly. I took a sip of my coffee. "I can do slow," I said. "I can't do rescue." He smiled faintly. "That's fair." We talked for nearly 2 hours, not about money, not about blame, about work, about fear, about the strange grief of growing up later than expected. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "I'm glad you stopped," he said quietly, even though it hurt. I met his eyes. So am I. That night, alone in my house, I didn't replay the conversation obsessively. I trusted it. That trust felt earned, not given. Weeks later, David invited me to dinner at his apartment. Just him. No surprises, no hidden agendas. The place was modest but clean. He had cooked, clumsily but sincerely. We ate, laughed lightly, spoke carefully. And when the check never came, because there was no check, I felt something settle permanently. I wasn't paying anymore, and I wasn't needed to. When I left, he hugged me, gently, without urgency. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too," I replied. This time, the words didn't heal like a promise to suffer. They felt like truth. Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself or demand recognition. It slips in quietly, usually after you stop chasing it. I noticed it one morning while standing in line at the pharmacy. Nothing special was happening. No revelations, no memories crashing in. Just me, waiting patiently, not checking my phone, not scanning for problems to solve. I felt fine. That word surprised me. For most of my life, fine had been a lie, a polite cover for exhaustion. Now it felt honest. David and I had found a rhythm. We spoke every week or two, sometimes more, sometimes less. There were no expectations attached, no emotional debts waiting to be paid. When he talked about work, I listened, but I didn't strategize for him. When he mentioned stress, I didn't offer solutions unless he asked. I was learning to trust him with his own life, and more importantly, I was learning to trust myself not to interfere. One afternoon, I ran into Amanda at the grocery store. She looked thinner, sharper, less certain. We acknowledged each other with a nod, nothing more. No bitterness rose in me, no urge to correct the past. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it just requires distance. That evening, I sat down and reviewed my finances with clear eyes. The damage was still there, but so was possibility. I adjusted my retirement plan, took on a part-time consulting role I actually enjoyed, cut expenses without feeling punished. For the first time, my future felt intentional, not reactive. Joyce came over for dinner that weekend. "You seem lighter," she said as we cleared the table. "I think I stopped negotiating with myself," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About whether I'm allowed to choose me." She smiled. "About time." Later that night, alone in bed, I thought about motherhood, about how it had shaped me, consumed me, and at times erased me. I realized something important. Being a good mother was never about giving endlessly. It was about teaching your child how to stand when you stepped back. And stepping back didn't mean stepping away, it meant stepping into truth. David had grown, not because I saved him, but because I stopped shielding him from consequence. That was the hardest lesson of all. One morning he called and said, "I got promoted." "That's wonderful," I said. "No help from you," he added, half joking. "I know. That's why it matters." We laughed, easy, unforced. After we hung up, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the sun climb higher in the sky. I thought about the woman I had been at 61, afraid to say no, afraid to be alone, afraid to stop proving her love. I felt tenderness for her. She had done the best she could with what she knew, but I was not her anymore. I was someone who understood that love without boundaries is not love, it's fear, and fear no longer ran my life. The future stretched ahead of me, not perfect, not guaranteed, but finally mine. And that was enough. People often ask what the moment was, the exact second everything changed. They expect a confrontation, a scream, a door slammed hard enough to echo. But change doesn't usually arrive like that. For me, it arrived the day I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone, not of being unloved, not of being needed less. That fear had guided so many of my choices. It had disguised itself as generosity, as patience, as devotion. But fear wears many costumes, and I had mistaken it for love. I know better now. I still see my son, not every week, not on a schedule, not because I owe him access to me. We talk when there's something real to say. Sometimes he asks my opinion, sometimes he doesn't, and that's okay. Our relationship no longer runs on guilt or obligation. It runs on honesty, and honesty requires space. I see Amanda occasionally around town. She never looks at me for long. I don't look back. Some stories don't need resolution, just distance. Joyce remains constant. We walk together in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes not. She never asks if I regret my choices. She knows the answer. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, I found a notebook from years ago. Inside were lists, things I needed to remember, things I needed to do for others, things I could never forget, payments, promises, plans. There was nothing in it about me. No dreams, no desires, no space. I closed it gently and placed it in the recycling bin. That woman needed it then. I don't now. At 61, I learned something no one had ever taught me. Love that costs you your future is not love. It's fear dressed up as loyalty. And boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose when and how to open. I still love my son. That never changed. What changed was my belief that love required suffering to be real. It doesn't. Love can exist alongside limits. Care can exist without control. And peace can exist without approval. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the early morning, coffee warm in my hands, watching the world wake up. The air feels different now, lighter. Not because my life is perfect, but because it's honest. I don't rush anymore. I don't explain myself. I don't trade my safety for someone else's comfort. And when people ask me how I found the strength to stop, I tell them the truth. I didn't stop loving. I stopped disappearing.